Outside the Box Reviews, we are taking a look at the Mezco, Real Masters Silent Screamer, Edison's Frankenstein 1910 figure. Mezco's Silent Screamer line, I believe, predates their Cinema of Fear line. Instead of doing 80s slashers that they did in that iconic series of figures, here they tackled silent film era monsters. Alongside Frankenstein 1910, we saw characters from The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, and Metropolis. And as with most things that Mezco has done, especially back in those days, it features a heavily stylized look to it. This is a line I've been aware of for quite a while, but had never actually picked any of the figures up from it, mostly because the heavy stylization of the figures was kind of a deterrent for me. However, I was at a horror convention and I had the chance to buy this guy loose for $5. Couldn't turn that down just for the sheer amount of plastic we get here. I'm sure I could probably melt this down and sell it for more than $5 if I really wanted to. But let's take a closer look and see if I spent my money wisely. First up, we have a kind of trading card accessory. It's a translucent piece of plastic, and we have Frankenstein 1910. It's basically a picture of the action figure with the title of the movie on there. I guess you could probably backlight that. That doesn't really work, so we'll hold the red light. But it's an interesting piece. Kind of, I guess, supposed to look like a piece of film, but it's a nice little accessory. The monster also comes with a selection of books from Dr. Frankenstein's lab. Here we have a medical journal, which is really nicely done, kind of like a brown leather-bound book, volume 1 on the side, a little big and cartoony, but still looks very nice. The pages are nicely detailed, and honestly, this was part of the reason I bought the figure, because for the price the guy wanted for it, I knew even if I didn't like the figure all that much, things like these books are really nice little accessories to throw into any kind of setup or display. So these were definitely worth at least part of the purchase. And then we get Life and Death by M. Shelley. I assume that's Mary Shelley. I'm not familiar with Life and Death. I really am not familiar with any of her works outside of Frankenstein, but a nice nod to the creator of the character here. This is a nice blue book. It is a different sculpt. It's slightly thinner than the medical journal, different spine to it. So you are getting unique pieces, which is very nice. And I love the kind of weathered texture they gave to the book. Though I wish that weathering had gone over the letters. The letters are kind of above the dirt and grime, which is a little odd. And then we have this very, very thin red book, which has no detailing as to what it is. Almost looks like it would have been like a binder full of papers or something. It's maybe more of a folder than a book itself, but another nice piece and unique looking compared to the other two. And what good is Frankenstein's lab without a skull? Very cool looking skull. Now this kind of matches the stylized look of the monster. I do think I remember something weird with the skeleton in Edison's version of the film, but it's really neat looking. A very cool stylized skull. I like it. And just because it's stylized, I feel like it still fits with Dr. Frankenstein's lab just being something strange. And then we get the massive display base. This thing is absolutely huge. We have these two very large doors here as our backdrop, which have really nice wood grain texture going through them. There's even like nails or some kind of bolt system coming up with all the boards, giving a really nice sense of detail. These heavy metal door frames and hinges coming through. And in the center, we have a porthole, which is translucent, though it's a bit dusty, so it's probably more translucent if it wasn't so dusty. You can see some cracks going through it. It's a very cool piece. Now this will actually open. It's on hinges. It doesn't open to anything, but it's a cool touch. I believe in the movie, this is how they revealed the monster, so it's a really nice kind of homage to that. It would have been cool if there was some kind of background piece that came with, just a piece of cardboard or something you could put behind it. But still, we're getting quite a lot here, so I'm not really complaining. But even the door frame has some great detail. There's wood inside the frame here, and the back side of the doors are equally detailed to the front, which is fantastic. And then when you shut the door, there is kind of a little piece of plastic here at the bottom, which keeps them fairly well contained, so you don't have to worry about them flapping open while you're trying to set up a display. And on the bottom, we get the floor of the laboratory. It's a very irregular shape around the bottom, which is kind of cool. Cracked up stone. We have two very large pegs for the creature to stand on, but some really nice detailing here on the floor. Then we kind of have blood and chemicals spilled on the ground, which also looks very cool. These blood splatter pieces actually line up with the feet of the monster, so I wonder if they're supposed to be like bloody footprints. And we have these two broken beakers down here. These are actually removable, but they do have a peg sticking off of them, so you can't really do too much with them. But they are very cool that they're removable from the base, and you can kind of try to do something else with them, and they just easily peg right back into the display stand. And it's also nice that you don't have to worry about them rolling away, which I'm sure they'd be very want to do. otherwise. But a really, really nice display piece. Very large, very space consuming, but very cool. As for the monster itself, I can safely say this looks very, very little like the creature from Edison's film from 1910. Now, if you're not familiar with Edison's take on the Frankenstein monster, it was one of the very earliest movies that still survived. It was thought to be a lost film for quite a while, and I believe it showed up in like a private collection somewhere, and now it's available for anyone to watch. It's on YouTube, it's public domain. It's also very short. I believe it's only like 10 minutes long, so not much of a time investment, but it's a very crudely done version of the story. There are some cool special effects in it, but it's done very much like a play. There's not a whole lot of craziness that we would get even with the Universal movie 20 years later, but that version of Frankenstein's monster, I remember specifically that he had a lot of hair and looked very weird for it. And here we get a completely bald version of the monster, but the face is absolutely gruesome. We zoom in here, we just have some great, great gnarly detail. His one eye is like bugging out of its socket. Flesh is torn away. We can see his mouth being ripped away and the teeth underneath. Even though this bit of flesh coming across the front doesn't really seem anatomically correct, it is Frankenstein's monster. It's sewn up from cadavers, so it could be kind of however weird it needs to look. The other eye is kind of swollen shut. He has no ears on either side, and it's just a grotesque mess. But the paint job on here is very cool, and the stylization of it, while not looking a damn thing like Edison's version, is still neat. Around his neck, we have the big furry collar. Got some blood splatter coming down here, which is really cool. His entire costume looks like it's made out of burlap. It's just very rugged looking. Turn around to the back, we have a Jason Voorhees Part 7 style spine protruding from the figure. And for some reason, this thing is a hair magnet. But a lot of great detailing in that burlap. You can see bits of flesh sticking through, blood sticking through. The spine and ribs around it look very, very cool. The body's also very hunched. We can see the one shoulder is very high up, the other very low down. Once again, just really bringing the look together. This thing was sewn together from a bunch of body parts that don't belong together. We can see the side of the torso is sucked in here, which is very odd. The arms, incredibly long. I don't know where he found these arms. They're very long and very skinny. More torn up sections here. Coming down, we can see the sleeve ends. It goes into the arm. Forearm has some nice veins going through it. Some nice gore on it as well. And the hands are one of my favorite pieces of this figure because they're both completely different and both wrong. Here we have this one hand, very large hand. You can see the bones kind of going through it, the big brown fingernails, very creepy looking. And I can't decide whether this hand has two thumbs, one on each side, or if it has no thumbs. But it's not right. It's definitely not a normal human hand. Going over to the other side, very similar detail on the wrist. The top of the hand is less bony. This is more flesh covered. Then we look at it and it looks a little more normal. Definitely a normal thumb on there. Still the big gnarly nails. But then we realize that Frankenstein's monster has one too many fingers. If you wanted to Flippy the Bird, you'd actually have to put two fingers up. So a very, very dusty but cool addition to this figure. And before you accuse me of being lazy with this review, this dust just will not come off. I've sprayed it with canned air. I've tried to wipe it away. It is stuck on there ridiculously tight, and it's kind of a mess. It was definitely a mess. Coming down to the waist, we kind of have like a piece of rope visible tying his pants up, which is really neat. His pants are just a slightly different color brown to the rest of his outfit, but still having that burlap look. Kind of has a loincloth on there as well, a piece of fur, which is the same color as his pants, so it doesn't show up too well. We have the tears away in the legs, where you can see the flesh underneath. We have these bandaged up lower legs coming off at very odd angles, looking completely broken. And then his feet, this one you can see must have some very large toes. It's kind of bursting out of these bags he has on his feet. And this one looks a little more normal, but still very deformed. So his feet are completely different from one another, just like his hands. And we do have big peg holes on the bottom just for the giant ones in the display stand. For articulation, Frankenstein's monster has about the same articulation you'd expect from a Mezco figure of the time. He has a swivel at the neck, so he's an okay range of motion, but no side-to-side motion or anything like that. Pin socket shoulders, which are really nice. They move very far up and down and will swivel forward and back very easily. Both have that great range to them, which is great. We have a single hinge at the elbow. Then we rotate where the arm comes out of the sleeve there on both sides. At the waist, we have a cut joint, and then that's it. In standard Mezco fashion, nothing throughout the legs. For a size comparison, here he is next to the two different Diamond Select versions of Frankenstein's monster. See the Series 2 release there on the right, and the larger new Son of Frankenstein release on the left. And it looks like if he had been put together correctly, he'd actually be in decent scale with the Son of Frankenstein figure. Both of these other two Frankenstein's monster figures are standing with their legs fairly straight, but Mezco's are all broken and twisted, and then his head is coming out of his chest instead of really having a neck. So it'd be easy to imagine that if this character was allowed to stand like a normal person, he would be just as tall as that Son of Frankenstein figure. But he's completely messed up, and that's not happening. So I actually enjoy this figure a lot more than I had anticipated. He's decently done. There's a lot of great detail to him. His display base is enormous. He comes with those great books and this awesome skull. There's a lot to like here. But he's not a great representation of the character he's supposed to be. He's just some crazy version of Frankenstein's monster dreamed up by Mezco and given the Edison moniker. He has some slight resemblances to that creature, but the extreme look they've given us here is something they could never have even dreamed of doing on film in 1910. Looking at some of the other releases in their Silent Screamers line, it's a mixed bag. Some characters do look a great deal like they do on film, especially when you get into some of the more German expressionistic things. Like, I think I remember Dr. Caligari looking fairly decent. I forget if the Somnambulist did. I know the robot from Metropolis looked pretty good. Still stylized, but it was definitely recognizable as what she was. But if this figure stood on its own, I think most people, even horror fans, would probably just say it's a zombie. I think Frankenstein's monster would not be one of the first things they called it. So just really for that, for failing to create the figure they claim it to be, I'm going to give this figure a very, very mild not recommend. And I'm honestly very torn. It either way doesn't go very far above or below that recommendation line, but it's a completely serviceable figure. The accessories are very strong, but the accessories to me are worth more than the figure. I enjoy them significantly more than the figure itself. The figure still has a nice charm to it. It's a unique idea, a unique concept, but it's not what it says on the package. It's a very far cry from Frankenstein 1910. But it still makes me want to pick up some others in this line. Definitely won't pay much for them if I find them, but if I get a good opportunity like I did with this guy to pick them up loose for cheap, I would definitely jump on some of the other characters. I love that Diamond Select has given us some great Universal horror figures over the years, but some of those characters that weren't Universal, that are completely instrumental in the history of horror movies, that predate those Universal movies, do tend to get left out. So total kudos for Mezco for even putting this line out there. Something I'm sure we won't see again anytime soon. Only one or two characters from that line I could imagine would have enough sellability now to make it worthwhile for a company to put it out there with the increased cost of plastic and manufacturing. But if somebody did, I would definitely give it a try. Make sure you check me out on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. Also follow me on Facebook, link below. And until next time, it's been another Outside the Box Reviews. Stay tuned for more to come.